In order for the people to put the United States firmly on the path towards peace, democracy, and general well-being, the power of the monopolists who dominate our country must be curbed and finally broken, and the people themselves must take political charge under the leadership of the working class. The struggle for socialism grows inevitably out of the everyday fight of the workers and their allies, especially against the present menaces of economic chaos, fascism, and war. In all good time, the American people, on the basis of their existing conditions, will decide how and in what forms they will introduce socialism. The way our party foresees that possible development of the future is along the following general lines. Firstly, we propose the regular election of a democratic coalition government based on a broad, united front combination of workers, small farmers, Negroes, professionals, small business groups, and other democratic elements who are ready to fight against monopoly, economic breakdown, fascism, and war. This type of united front government could well have behind it an overwhelming majority of the people, as it has in other lands. It goes without saying that the election of such a democratic government could only be brought about in the face of a powerful and very surely violent opposition from organized reaction. The whole history of the American class struggle, which is full of examples of employer violence in strikes and in other mass struggles, teaches this lesson with unmistakable clarity. The bitter attacks made against the Progressive Party, led by Henry Wallace during the 1948 elections, gave a sure indication of the frenzy and desperation with which the capitalists would confront a People's United Front combination that was strong enough to actually threaten their control of Congress and the presidency. Obviously, it would be an extremely difficult proposition to elect a truly democratic government in the face of this strong, violent, and reactionary opposition. Second, our party contends that such an anti-fascist, anti-war, democratic coalition government, once in power, would be compelled either to move to the left or die. With state power in its hands, it would be forced to pass over from the more or less defensive program upon which it was elected to an offensive policy. Confronted with the sabotage and open resistance of big business, it would have no other alternative than this, if it hoped to realize any of the progressive legislation of its program, and to ensure its staying in power. A people's government would be forced to proceed directly to curb and undermine the power of the monopolies by adopting far-reaching policies of nationalization of the banks and major industries, the breakup of big landholdings, the beginning of a planned economy, the elimination of reactionary elements from the control of the army, schools, and industry, as well as various other measures to weaken monopoly and to strengthen the working class as the leading progressive force in the nation. Third, a democratic, anti-fascist, anti-war government under the violent attacks of the capitalists and in its efforts to find solutions to the burning economic and political problems, if it were to survive, would necessarily move leftward, toward socialism, much as the people's democracies of Eastern and Central Europe are now doing. Some liberals believe that a united front coalition government in this country would introduce a regime of, quote, progressive capitalism, end quote. But this is a naive and dangerous illusion. Capitalism is now in its monopoly stage and is hopelessly reactionary. Any people's government in our times, in order to be progressive, or even to live, inevitably must move towards socialism. American socialism, beyond question, will have its own specific forms and methods, but basically it will be the same as socialism in other countries, with monopoly capital completely defeated, the industries and national resources in the hand of the people, production for general use instead of profit, and the working class the leader of the whole people. Only in this way will this country and the world finally be freed from the dangers of poverty, economic chaos, fascist slavery, and murderous war. These steps could be taken legally by a people's government, notwithstanding the opposition of the capitalists, however violent. to promote the election of a progressive coalition government of this type which, by force of circumstances, would move to the left and eventually to socialism, on the general pattern of the European people's democracies, is obviously not to advocate a program of force and violence, the enemies of the Communist Party to the contrary notwithstanding. The charge by the Department of Justice that our party advocates the forcible overthrow of the government is a brazen, conscious lie. The plain fact of the matter is that the communist movement in this country as well as abroad, since the Seventh World Congress in 1935, has been going along the practical working theory in this period. Because of the broad mass struggle against fascism and war, it had become possible in a whole number of democratic countries, including the United States, legally to elect democratic governments which could, by curbing and defeating capitalist violence, orient themselves in the direction of building socialism. Is it possible to elect such a democratic coalition, anti-monopoly government in the United States, the stronghold of world capitalism? It is a sinister fact that civil rights in this country, notably since the end of the war, have been seriously whittled away. But the United States is by no means at the stage of fascism. Nor do we communists consider American fascism to be inevitable. The big popular upsurge in the recent presidential election was a dramatic justification of our faith in the democratic strength of the American people. It showed a profound anti-fascist, anti-war sentiment among the masses. In the event of an economic crisis or a war, this mass democratic upsurge would be vastly greater and more clear-sighted. Our party's political line is thus based upon the assumption that it is possible, under present political conditions in the United States, for the broad masses of people, militantly led by the trade unions and a strong mass political party, to elect a coalition, anti-monopoly government. How long this possibility may last in the face of the fascist trends in this country is problematical. But if we should get fascism, if the United States were to be reduced to the level of fascist Spain, then the communists will also know how to reshape their policies to meet that kind of situation. It may well be asked, what resistance will American capitalism be able to make when the great masses of the people finally decide, as they surely will, to establish socialism? Today, American capitalism is strong, but it is not as strong as it appears to be, nor has it got permanently in on its present strength. Now it is true, Wall Street is the world bully and is busy trying to organize civil wars in various countries and to arm itself and other capitalist countries for another world war. But what will its power of resistance to socialism be when, as may be likely, the vast bulk of the rest of the world has, quote, gone socialist, end quote, when its own foreign markets have largely dried up, when it is undermined by economic crises, when it may have just about wrecked itself by its projected world war, and when its working class has developed a Marxist-Leninist ideology and sets out to bring about socialism? It may well turn out that it will be far easier for the American working class, in the midst of a socialist world, to establish socialism in this country than now it appears to be the case, with American capitalism at its peak of its strength. Who can foretell these things? Certainly we Marxist-Leninists do not indulge in such prophecy. In connection with the fight for eventual socialism, there are three basic, general considerations to be borne in the mind. First, the question is not that the Social Democrats want to bring about socialism in a legal manner, while the Communists want to establish it by violence. Such a placing of the question is utter nonsense. The true issue is that the Social Democrats do not fight for socialism at all, their line leading only to the buttressing of capitalism, whereas the Communists do fight for socialism, and in their relentless struggle against capitalist resistance, they adapt their strategy and tactics to the given situation. Second, the question also is not whether the capitalists will or will not use violence to prevent the establishment of socialism. Of course they will use violence, here as well as elsewhere. It would be silly to think otherwise. Lenin taught us that a long time ago. Are not the capitalists, even at this very moment, attempting to organize another world war in their effort to murder world socialism? The real question, therefore, is how to confront the capitalists with such gigantic masses of people and broad, democratic political movements that they will be relatively isolated and thus unable to organize effective violence against the cause of progress. This is the purpose of the Communist United Front anti-fascist policy. Third, the question finally is not whether or not there will be socialism in the United States and the rest of the world. History has already settled that matter. Socialism will come, eventually, regardless of all the violent efforts of the capitalists to stop it. The real issue is to bring about socialism with the minimum of capitalist violence and at the earliest date. The communist line is the way of peaceful, advanced, and social progress. The policy of the capitalists lead to mass suffering, political enslavement, and devastating war.